Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's live stream. We don't have a special guest joining us this evening, so I'll have more time to interact with the comments, but there is plenty to talk about, that is for sure. Right, where do we start? I mean, the big news at the moment, obviously, is the attack by Iran on Israel, which is quite concerning in many ways. It's fascinating to see how things are going to develop there. I think, will it develop into a wider conflict? It may well do. I'm just loading my slides here. I've just realized I'd forgotten to do before we started. So we'll just get my slides up. Right, here we go. Right, got them. Yes, I'm going to talk a bit about the Middle East situation later on, and in particular, again, to talk about Humza Yousaf's response to it, which is just quite bizarre, quite concerning. I think he's a case study in the attitude of some people towards the Middle East conflict, and we can have a look at that a little bit later on. Right, I've got my slides going now, so here we go. Right, first one, we'll come back to this a little bit later. Our conference, 9th of November. Get your tickets. I've just put the link in the comments on YouTube and Facebook. If you're on X, you can scroll through a bit. You'll find a post with it there. Do get your tickets. One of the speakers we've got, we haven't announced officially on social media, but I'll tell you now. Andrea Williams of Christian Concern is speaking at our conference, which we're very excited about. That'll be great. She's a really good speaker. I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with Andrea Williams and the work of Christian Concern. So we're looking forward to listening to her. I think we might be having a bit of a chat with her as well during the conference. So, yeah, get your tickets now. We would love to see you there. Something else I always forget to do during the live stream, and that is to encourage people to share it. So if you're certainly on Facebook and X, you can repost or share or whatever, then more people can watch, more people can tune in, and that's all to the good. Can you share on YouTube? I need to check that. I'm never quite sure. But do share this if you can, and then more people can join us. Right, just while the audience is growing, I'll show you a few things I was up to the weekend. It was Doors Open Day in Edinburgh. So that's the inside of the little Trinity Maritime Museum in Leith, which is very interesting, but it's not normally open. You have to make an appointment, like a week in advance to go along. So I've never done it, partly because I thought it looks quite small, and I feel a bit embarrassed making an appointment, someone going along specially to show me around. I think I'd probably be done in about a quarter of an hour or something. I don't necessarily want to read about every sextant and every compass and every painting on the wall. So I'd never been, but it's Door Opens Day, so I went along. And I thought its location, those of you who are in Edinburgh, it's near the bottom of Leith Walk. The bottom of Leith Walk is renowned as a place where people with some issues and problems are present. There's a lot of drug addicts around. That's its reputation. And I wonder if the reason why this museum isn't open all the time is partly because they'd have a lot of trouble with local people wandering in to use it for who knows what purposes. But just a thought. It's a bit sad if that's the case. As the Church of Scotland Church there, that was the Catholic Church. Is it Star of the Sea, St Mary's Star of the Sea? Someone there recognized me, a viewer of this live stream, no less. So if you're watching, it's good to see you. That was a lovely church. Now, the things that are more interesting I wanted to talk about was I called into another couple of places while I was wandering around Leith on Sunday. And one of them was the Sikh Gurdwara. I'm not quite sure what the definition of Gurdwara is. Sikh temple, whatever. So the door was open, so I just went and said, could I come in and have a look around? They said, sure, no problem. So I went up to their worship area, and I'm not quite sure what that's called. Okay, that was interesting enough. But they said, have some lunch, join us for some lunch. So I did. So I had some lunch there. The whole temple community or whatever it's called was gathered having lunch. A lot of people sitting cross-legged on the floor. I didn't try and do that, or I'd probably still be there. But lunch was very nice, very hospitable. It was interesting. Obviously, inviting me to stay for lunch was very kind of them. And people were very friendly. I didn't get the impression, though, that they were thinking, right, here's a potential convert for us. I didn't get that impression. No one was trying to make friends, or would you like to come back next week, or can we give you a book to read about Sikhs? And there was nothing like that at all. And looking at the people there, they did seem to all be, people of minority race. Let's put it that way. But it was interesting to see that. And I then, on a roll, went to the Hindu. I've forgotten the proper term to it. Let's call it a temple for the time being. In any case, so I went along there as well. Exactly the same experience. The door was open. I think whatever the event was had just finished. People were milling around. Just went in and said, "Could I come in and have a look?" I said, "Yes. On you go." Again, it was upstairs. That's in the church you call it an altar. I don't know what they call it in a Hindu temple. I don't know. And again, they said, "Do you want some lunch? Stay for lunch." Well, I just had lunch with the Sikhs, so I didn't have lunch with the Hindus as well. And again, same story. No one particularly seen me as a target for conversion. It didn't seem to be. No one was trying to make friends or invite me to anything else, but everyone was very, very civil, and that was that. Now, it's quite interesting seeing those things. I mean, how many people in Scotland do you think, if they see an establishment like that, or if they would visit it, how many would have a problem? How would be thinking, "Oh, I don't like this," or "These people, I wish these people weren't here," or it's a racist sentiment or whatever. How many people would feel that? I think really absolutely minimal number of people would feel that. I think a lot of people would think, well, actually, that's quite interesting. And, there's a group of people that seem to be a close community. That's great. I don't know if people feel particularly excluded from it. I think most people would be very positive. I think tensions could emerge in a culture when you get a sort of 50-50 split, where half are Hindus and half are Sikhs or whatever. That's when things get a little bit tense. But this sort of situation we've got in Scotland, I'm going to see there. I really don't think many people at all would have any sort of concern or any sort of hostility or disapproval of their setup. Just seem to be a community of people enjoying each other's company. When I say community, gets used pretty loosely these days, doesn't it? Anything can get described as community, but these seem to be two genuine communities of people, and it was interesting to go and see them. Right. So it also made me think as well, often politicians, they really like to go and visit these sort of places and have their picture taken. And I can imagine, if I was a local councillor or an MSP and I'd gone along, then yes, they'd give me a lunch. They'd been perfectly friendly, and they say, I just said, "Can I take my photograph with you?" I'd say, "Oh yes, that'd be nice." And you see these pictures, don't you? The endless pictures of politicians visiting these sorts of establishments, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, whatever. I would say, fine, but to be honest, it's pretty superficial. And also, there's lots of other communities as well they could go and visit. Lots of other clubs and societies, social activities as well. Now, I think when it comes to Islam, some people have other concerns. They're concerned about some of the values associated with Islam. Now, I've spent not a massive amount of time, but some time with Muslims socially as well, eating together, chatting, debating. And I would say the vibe in mosques I've been to just seemed the same as in the temple, the Sikh temple, the Hindu temple. To be honest, at my church, there's a lunch after the service this Sunday. And if someone turned up, it would be inevitable someone would say, "Oh, do you want to stay for lunch?" And you can stay and join in with the lunch. The same sort of buzz, people knowing each other, a genuine community. And I think my experience of mosques is the same. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't scrutinize the teachings of religions. And certainly it's not to say that we shouldn't be aware that there might be some people with extreme views or extreme interpretations of religion. Then I think we need to be very open and willing to discuss that. But I think people's general attitude is, these different communities, okay, all well and good. That's very interesting. They'll be very welcoming, and there's no problem whatsoever. Right, got a couple of comments here. As Niall Fraser still in the party, speaking at the conference. Niall Fraser is not involved in the family party and won't be speaking at the conference. So there's a straight answer to that one. Right, good evening. I remember Waterwreath Walk many years ago. Very pleasant then, as I remember it. Must have changed, sadly. Leith is a very, very mixed bag. There's some really lovely buildings, but interspersed, there's a few lots of brutalist 60s, 70s blocks that are pretty tatty. I mean, I sometimes appreciate them a little bit. There's an architecture. But whatever you think of the architecture, they're just not well. It's just a mess. It's a broken glass and graffiti sort of land, a lot of it. But then within that are these jewels, amazing old buildings, really lovely things. Yeah, an interesting. But I heard someone say about Leith once that it's up and coming, always has been and always will be, but never seems to quite get there. I don't. Maybe that's not unfair. Maybe that's not maybe that's unfair. Right, the Church of Scotland. All right, okay. Pro contraception. Right, I'm not familiar with the Church of Scotland's official teaching on that. It's interesting with the Church of Scotland. I think sometimes they have a committee that comes out with an official statement about something, but then there's a bit of an open question about whether or not that's shared by the church as the official policy. But I think in terms of being a reference point for Orthodox Christian teaching, the Church of Scotland probably doesn't serve that purpose. And an awful lot of people within the Church of Scotland would agree with that very definitely. I think on the subject of abortion, I understand that they do officially take quite a conservative position at the moment. I mean, one can only imagine that will liberalize over time. But yeah, that's my understanding. I haven't looked into it in any great depth. Right, so let's go on from my my Sunday wanders into the political business of the week. Right, so the assisted dying bill that's making its way through the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish government has pointed out that it's not compatible with the powers of the Scottish Parliament, basically, which is a bit of a strange thing for them to do, because Liam MacArthur, who's the Lib Dem who's brought the bill forward, he's already said that. He's already been aware of that. He's been taking the steps necessary to try and put the process in place with the UK government to deal with these issues. I mean, they are really technicalities. They're not major issues. But it just seems a bit strange that the Scottish government's come out and said that. It's almost as if they're sort of not wanting it. I get the impression with the Scottish government at the moment, they really don't want any controversy. They just want a bit of smooth sailing for a while. And assisted suicide would be a big controversy in the Scottish Parliament. And I think it's quite likely the majority of SNP MSPs would vote for it. So I just get a feeling from the Scottish government at the moment that they just don't want to fight over these things. That anything for a quiet life is their attitude. So the fact that they've pointed this out, even though, well, everyone sort of knew it already, just seems to indicate a bit of caution there. I don't think it's some sort of moral renewal within the SNP. So I just think they're a bit battered and bruised. And yeah, would rather keep out of fights for the time being. So this gentleman here, Amar Anwar, you must have seen him on the television, social media, whatever. He's a lawyer. Well, he's a political activist primarily, but his profession happens to be that he's a lawyer. And he pops up in all sorts of politically charged cases and comes out with pretty extreme rhetoric on the side of his political opinion. But because he's a lawyer, somehow or other, people tend to take that as though it's got some sort of additional credibility when it hasn't. It really shouldn't do. Because he's now saying that the whole justice system is institutionally racist. When I read the article, his basis for saying that, basically there isn't any. He said that, remember the Sheku Bayo case? This was the man in Fife who was high on drugs, behaving erratically and dangerously. The police were called. They tried to arrest him. He resisted arrest. He attacked a police officer. He thumped a female police officer, knocked her to the ground. Other police officers restrained him. He struggled and struggled. They restrained him. And sadly, he died in that struggle. Now, of course, because Sheku was black, the political activists leapt on it, thinking, oh, fantastic, we've got our George Floyd. Now, you may think that's a really cynical, horrible thing to suggest, but to be honest, that is exactly what they thought. They spied their opportunity and thought, great, we're really going to make political capital out of this one. And when you've got that situation arising, then Anna Amwar is going to be front of the queue to be right at the center of it, pushing his opinion. Now, the fact that he says the justice system is institutionally racist, well, that's just par for the course. Everything's racist. Everything's institutionally racist, according to him. He's a hard left political activist. But of course, the BBC report it. The BBC report his comments like that consistently. I mean, Police Scotland have already said that they're institutionally racist. which I think is nonsense. They say that their officers aren't, but the institution somehow is. How that works, I do not know. So this Sheku Bayo case, there's a big public inquiry was going on. I don't think the report's been published into it, but it's the sort of inquiry where they're going to pick and pick and pick, just in the hope of finding something, being able to accuse someone of being racist somewhere. I mean, one of the things was they were accusing the police of having failed. Headline, police apologized for failure. Then you read the small print. What was the failure? The failure was to maintain the confidence of Sheku Bayo's family. I mean, whatever does that mean? I mean, again, this family being used by political activists to try and stir up this issue and maximize its campaigning potential. So, of course, it's in their interest to say, they've lost confidence in the police. But this, basically, they write the headlines for the BBC and for other newspapers as well. Don't trust people who scratch their nose when talking. Okay, I better be careful. I think I might do that sometimes. Right. Hopefully not anymore. Yeah, city suicide, of course, is, well, it might be passed, if not implemented in England and Wales, before in Scotland. Now, it's interesting. I'm not quite sure how this fits with devolution. I'm not sure there's anything in the devolution settlement that says about whether or not the Scottish Parliament can allow doctors to give poison to their patients. I'm not sure that's something that's actually stated in the devolution settlement. So I don't know if there's a possibility that the Westminster government could legislate for the whole of the UK. But if you have it in one part of the UK and not in another part, then that's going to be a bit farcical situation, isn't it? There'll be death tourism. People will go and live in another part of the UK in order to die, if you get my meaning. The Scottish law says you have to live there for a year. But people with a long-term illness, there will be people saying, yep, okay, I'm going to move to Scotland, tick off my year, get registered, tick off my year, and then my doctor can give me the poison in Scotland. And that is inevitably going to happen. We shall see. This was an interesting story, wasn't it? And I've been sort of following the Conservative leadership context. I can't say I've been particularly inspired by any of the candidates. I don't think any of them are social conservatives. Someone like Kemi Badenoch, she's conservative in some ways, culturally conservative on things like trans, etc., race. She's quite conservative. But when it comes to marriage, LGB relationships, pro-life, then there's nothing there whatsoever. No indication whatsoever that she holds socially conservative views. So would she ever think, oh yeah, the Scottish Family Party, I quite like what they stand for. They're on my wavelength. As far as I can tell, no way. Totally different. Kemi, I mean, she could maybe join the Reform Party. She might fit in there, or in the right wing of the Conservative Party. But the Family Party, no, there's no indication that she aligns with our values at all, I would say. But she said a few things that rocked the boat. And one of them was she was talking about maternity pay. And she was saying, basically, it's not fair because it takes money off working people and gives it to people who are not working. Now, okay, I suppose as an economically conservative politician, that's the sort of thing you might say, stop taxing people to give it to other people. But this particular instance, I mean, we would say completely the opposite. I mean, maternity pay, we want to encourage family life. We want to support parents. We want to help them through the challenging time, including financially challenging time, when you've got young children. So the idea of paying a new mum for weeks, months, whatever, after the birth of a child, I mean, that seems a really good thing to us. Out of all the things you look at for saving money, that's not one that would come up on our agenda at all. So I totally disagree with her there. Now, it's interesting with maternity pay. I'll explain our policy, which I think is, I put on social media. Quite a few people are saying they really liked it. Because the way maternity pay works is, let's say the mum-to-be is a lawyer earning £200,000 a year. Then if she's having a baby, then she would go off work and have maternity pay at 90% of that salary. Okay, massive, thousands and thousands of pounds a month. And that's basically almost all of it paid by the taxpayer. Now, if someone had a question mark about that, I would agree. I'm not sure if someone that one mum should be being paid, I don't know, £10,000 a month to be at home looking after the baby, whereas the mum next door is being paid, £600 a month looking after the baby. So in other words, the job you used to do before you had the baby shouldn't determine how much money the state pays you while you're on maternity leave. I think that's quite an important principle. But the main issue with maternity leave as it operates now is you have to have been in a job to get it. So let's say you're a mum who's had one kid, then a couple of years later you have another one. A couple of 18 months later you have another one. 18 months later you have another one. Now, what some women do through that is they sort of play the system. So they'll be on the books of an employer. They'll go on maternity leave. Then they'll come back for a very short period. Then they'll go on maternity leave. Then come back for a very short period. And just see if they can string it out. So you get the maternity pay throughout, for years. Going on for years. Whereas other women will say, right, okay, this is the phase when I'm going to have my kids. So I don't want to be going back to work when my child's, just 1 or 2. I want to have a few years off work. I want to have, say, 5 years off, and going to have 3 or 4 children or whatever. Now that mum potentially doesn't get any maternity pay at all because she didn't have a job just before she was pregnant with the children. Now you see the problem. I just think that is really, really unfair. Surely with a society with an appalling demographic crisis, fertility crisis, then what we want is to enable people to have as many children as they want to. So if you've got a mum who wants to have 4 children over 6 years and not work during that, devote herself to bringing up those children, surely the state should be saying, this is great, we're right behind you, we'll give you maternity pay, the same as if you'd been in a job. But that doesn't happen. So that's our policy. So maternity pay, instead of it being dependent on having just had a job, maternity pay should be pay for being a mum rather than pay for being a mum who used to have a job just before. You get that? I mean, that just seems absolutely obvious to us. Now, why has that not happened? It seems so obvious there's an injustice here, right? The reason it hasn't happened is because who is it that campaigns on these women's issues? Well, it's feminists. You're not going to get any feminists saying, we want to stick up for the rights of the full-time mum, the woman who wants to be a full-time mum for several years on end. What about her? You ain't going to get any feminists saying that. They're a bit embarrassed by her. They're saying, come on, fulfill your potential, get back to work. Don't be having all these years off to look after children. You need to be getting back to work fast after each of these children. And that's the dominant agenda, narrative, whatever you want to call it, in the political system in Scotland and in the UK, including in the Conservative Party. And that is what we would change. That is what we would change. So let's have a look at the comments. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Nicola Sturgeon did encourage abortion tourism, didn't she, from Northern Ireland? She said, come to Scotland for your abortion and we will pay for it. By we, she meant the Scottish taxpayer. Right, I haven't read this yet. Let's have a look. Right. Kemi and Hamish are parents to 3 children. Hamish is Mr. Badenoch, I assume. The couple share 2 daughters and 1 son. They welcomed their first child in 2013, but going forward, I doubt she would benefit from maternity pay. Right, I'm not sure I absolutely follow there. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit. I'm not quite following that. Right, moving on. I say, right, I always say, I forget to say this. Do share this. Repost it on X, share it on Facebook, YouTube, whatever. Let's kind of get a few more people watching as well. Now, this was an interesting story. So the King came to the Scottish Parliament to mark its 25th anniversary. And some MSPs, particularly in the SNP, but some others as well, wore a white rose, which apparently the reason that they wore that was to symbolize some sort of alignment, with the Jacobites from 300 years ago, as a sort of Scottish nationalist, anti-royalist sort of thing. And I just thought, how bizarre to be going back to something 300 years ago that wasn't anti-royalist. Just, I mean, the Jacobites wanted a different king than the one they'd got. Basically, that was the squabble then. It wasn't that they didn't want a king; they wanted a different one. And yet, for people to be sort of aligning themselves on the basis of some sort of irrelevant division from 300 years ago, I mean, it's quite sad. I mean, to be honest, would you get out in England? I'm not sure there are similar issues in England that people would go back to like that. But it seems in Scotland, that's not unknown. Right, Boris Johnson. Right, do you see this story? So he's released his memoirs, and he obviously knows how to sell a book. So he's put all sorts of shocking things in. Some things I think should have remained secrets, and some things that would be damaging to the UK's relationship with foreign nations. For example, announcing they were considering some sort of military incursion into the Netherlands. I mean, you just don't say that, do you? That is damaging to the UK. It's positive for your book sales and increase your book sales, but it damages the UK's relationship with a foreign nation. Boris Johnson, which one's more important to him? Obviously, the book sales. Similarly with this, so making this revelation about the Queen's medical condition that may or may not have caused her death, and anyway, in her later life. If someone shares that is sort of on a personal capacity. That's something that the Queen herself decided not to release into the public domain. Now, you or I might well have felt, if we were in a position where we had some sort of conversational relationship with the Queen, that if that was not in the public domain, then it wouldn't be your job to put it there, would it? But oh no, not Boris Johnson. For Boris Johnson, selling the book comes first, getting the headlines, that's his instinct. That's what he does. So reveal that information. So not impressed, Boris, at all. This was interesting. I don't know if you remember Eric Kaufman. I did an interview with him a few weeks ago, put on the YouTube channel. A very interesting gentleman, professor at the University of Buckingham, if I remember rightly. Now, he put this on X. Bisexual women are nearly 3 times more likely to have experienced neglect and abuse in childhood than heterosexual women. Right, that's an interesting statistic, isn't it? Because what you've got to take from it, really, is that this neglect and abuse in childhood seems to be a cause of bisexuality. Now, this is not a one-off. I've seen studies like this for years and years and years that have shown that homosexuality or bisexuality is associated with, correlates with, more often follows from some sort of adverse childhood experience. Now, if you've got some characteristic that to some degree tends to be caused by something that's gone wrong earlier in life, I think that should have an impact on the way that thing is viewed. Whether or not it's viewed as something that's just part of the normal spectrum of a human variation, or whether or not it's something that's an indication that there's something that hasn't gone as it ought to have done. So that's always a very sensitive area indeed. But in general, I say I've seen many, many studies that have demonstrated that. If we talk about, for example, sexual attraction to children, now again, that can be associated with abuse in earlier life, can't it? I mean, everyone knows that. That's entirely uncontroversial. And people can imagine how that might work out. But similarly, with homosexuality, bisexuality, there are similar correlations as well, where mistreatment or bad experiences in childhood can result in these types of sexuality in adulthood. Now, I say that's extremely controversial area, extremely sensitive area to speak about, but the facts are the facts. Obviously, that's not to say that everyone who is bisexual or homosexual had some sort of experience like that in childhood, but a substantial number did, and that seems to have played a part in their later sexuality. Now, of course, as we become a more and more sexually mixed up society, then more and more children are going to be sexualized prematurely. They're going to have some sort of sexual experience, in many cases from a peer, almost, talking about young children as well. Because young children are sexualized, what does that result in? It results in them acting out various things with their friends, with their playmates at school. And this is just building up for the future, basically a stock of abuse and premature sexualization that is going to manifest in later life in the sexuality of the people as they grow up. That is my belief, and I think that's a concern. I think that's a process that we see going on in our society. Now, you probably can't read the writing on that, can you? I think I can read it. I can read it out to you. So this little image, I made it. I've had the idea for it for a little while. And the idea of it is it's supposed to be thought-provoking to people who are, for example, in the SNP or the Conservatives or Reform or the Lib Dems or the Greens or Labour or whatever. Someone in one of those parties who would say, well, obviously, you sort of challenge them, saying, your party stands for that. That's completely wrong. And they'll say, well, okay, yeah, I don't agree with that, but I like the rest. I like some of their other policies, and I want to join it, and I'll be on the inside, and I want to try and change it. That's what I want to try and do. Now, that can be a valid point of view, but it depends what the policies are that the party's got. Now, my illustration here, obviously, is we've got this person here saying vote Nazi, holding up a Nazi like promotional poster, and he's saying, no, he's not saying, he's thinking, he's saying vote Nazi, he's thinking, I really don't like some of the Nazi policies, like anti-Semitism and mass slaughter, but they'll sort out the economy and restore natural pride. I'd like to change the Nazi party from within. As long as they'll let me be a party member, I'll stick with them. If they let me be a member, they can't be too bad. Hey, right, what would you say to that person? What would you say to that person? Well, one thing I'd say to that person is that their anti-Semitism and their mass slaughter of human beings, they're such grave issues that when you say vote Nazi, you are actually supporting those things. You're claiming you don't like them, but in your actions and your representation, your encouragement for people to vote for the Nazi party, you are actually acting in favor of those things. So in other words, you can't detach yourself from the policies of your party. You can't claim that, oh, I'm not really standing for what the party stands for. When a party has a manifesto, or maybe things are not in the manifesto, but you know what they would do, then if you support that party, if you stand for election, if you campaign for that party, then you're campaigning for everything in that manifesto, whether you like it or not. So if you're saying vote Nazi and you know that they're horribly persecuting the Jews, you know they do that, but you don't like it. When you're saying vote Nazi, you're saying to people, vote for this terrible persecution of the Jews. It makes no difference when you're saying, but in private, I'm not really much for that. If you're saying vote for it, you're supporting it. You're encouraging other people to vote for it as well. Now, obviously, we're not talking about now Nazism as an extreme example. But to bring it closer to home, I would think about John Mason's situation in the SNP. So, as an example, the buffer zone bill, he didn't vote for it. He couldn't vote for it. It's against his conscience. So he's the one person who voted against it. But last election, was it in the SNP's manifesto that they were going to do this? I think it probably was. So in saying to everyone else in Scotland to vote SNP, it's as though he's saying to everyone else, vote for buffer zones. But then when it comes to vote in the Parliament, he says, I couldn't vote for that. It would be against my conscience. Now, think about abortion in general. So when John Mason says to Scotland, vote SNP, that's saying vote for a party that will continue abortion. So he's saying to everyone else in Scotland, vote for abortion. If a vote came up in the Parliament, I imagine he would probably say, I can't vote for it myself. It's against my conscience. Now, that's what I can't make sense of. How can you say something's against your own conscience, so you can't vote for it, but you urge everyone else to vote for it on election day? Because it's in a party's manifesto and you urge people to vote for it. I can't see how that makes sense. I would love to speak to someone involved in one of the mainstream parties to try and persuade me otherwise of this, to present some arguments to try and get out of that. But yeah, so far, I haven't heard them. Right, this is another fairly big political news story in Scotland. Scottish Conservatives elect their new leader. Well, their leadership campaign was interesting. I mean, what a mess. I mean, it seems like there's incredible dysfunction, tensions, bitterness, conflict within the Scottish Conservative Party. I mean, I have to say they were pretty good at keeping it covered up for years, but it seems like Douglas Ross is less than popular, and the party is really divided into factions in very, very serious ways. Now, Murdo Fraser stood out. I've commentated on his campaign already. I thought at some points I couldn't understand the depth of hostility towards Murdo Fraser in the media and from some other Conservative people. I think he's a very competent performer. Would probably, from my point of view, maybe been a slightly better leader of the Scottish Conservatives than Russell Findlay. Maybe, yeah, who knows? But the depth of hostility towards him needs an explanation, as far as I'm concerned. I don't understand where that came from. Now, the possibility is that people might object to what they think are his socially conservative views. He said he doesn't agree with same-sex marriage. He said he would continue access to abortion, which I think was extremely disappointed that he said that. But maybe when you've got people pulling the strings in the background, like Ruth Davidson, etc., they might be saying, oh no, Murdo Fraser, beyond the pale, we can't possibly have him. So did a bit of that go on in the background? I really don't know. Now, people have said Douglas Ross got the Conservatives, I think it's the highest level ever in the Scottish Parliament. There are 31 MSPs. But don't forget the 2021 Scottish election campaign. Do you remember it? Probably not. Do you remember the leaflets you got through the door from the Scottish Conservatives? Probably not. Well, I'll tell you who was on them. Ruth Davidson. As I remember it, a lot of their promotional material, it had like Ruth Davidson and Douglas Ross sort of arms around each other, campaigning together. They obviously realized that Ruth Davidson was their real electoral asset, and they wanted to use her as much as possible. And Douglas Ross was sort of along for the ride. So he did do well in those elections, but was it his influence or was it the hangover from Ruth Davidson's influence? I really do not know. Now, talking positively about Ruth Davidson, I'm talking about her political influence and her political effectiveness. I'm also not talking about her values, because I thought she was a terrible leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. I mean, would she fit in the family party? Whoa. I think we can safely say no, not anywhere near. Right, coming back to Russell Findlay. What do you know about Russell Findlay? Well, very little. I hadn't really seen much of him. I hadn't heard much of him. He didn't seem to have made much of an impact to me. But suddenly people claim that the establishment wanted him to be elected. And anyway, so there he is, elected. I think on our issues, again, there's a family party issues. Is he pro-life? Is he pro-marriage? Those sort of things. Basically, no. I mean, these things are not on his agenda whatsoever. He seems a bit straight talking. He maybe be a bit reformish. Let's put it that way. At the reformish end of the Conservative Party. Will that be what they need? Will it succeed? I really do not know. But he's come up with an interesting strategy as far as the Scottish Parliament is concerned. He wants to move debate on from independence. Now, I think as Scottish Conservatives, that seems like a good plan, because in previous elections, their election material, as well as having pictures of Ruth Davidson, basically it always seemed front and center as union. We don't want another divisive independence referendum. The SNP keep banging on about independence. But of course, the corollary of that was the Conservatives were always banging on about unionism. And I imagine that their polling indicated that that was their most potent issue. And that was where they had most traction with the electorate. So they kept banging on about it. Now, Russell Findlay is claiming that that era is over. That they're not going to keep banging on about independence and union. They're going to try and address the issues that matter to people, the day-to-day issues of running Scotland, the devolved issues. Now, you could see that as a clever strategy. Maybe, I don't know. But I still think there are an awful lot of people in Scotland for whom, when you come to politics, question one, union or independence, and then everything else is secondary to that. I mean, to some people, everything else is almost irrelevant. Compared to that, you can sacrifice anything to those causes. So I'm not sure it's the right strategy, but anyway, so he's trying. But the way he's doing it, his tactics to achieve it seem quite bizarre. He says he's going to boycott debates about independence in the Scottish Parliament. Now, the SNP are forever bringing forward a debate, a total waste of time, in the Scottish Parliament about how an independent Scotland could benefit Scotland with regard to this, that, and the other. and there's, the SNP go along, or the Conservatives would respond to it. I mean, it's all, but it's not what a devolved assembly is supposed to be for. But anyway, that's what the SNP does. But Russell Findlay has said that the Conservatives' approach to it is going to be they don't go. They're just going to boycott the whole thing. Now, if by boycotting it, you stopped it happening, that might achieve something. If by boycotting it, it meant that you just had the nationalist parties standing there talking to themselves, and there were no unionist parties arguing with them, that maybe would be an effective strategy. But if you opt out just as the Conservatives, and you leave in the Parliament Labour and the Lib Dems to do your arguing for you, surely unionists are going to watch and thinking, oh, thank goodness the Labour Party and the Lib Dems are standing up for what I think. So I think this is a very bizarre strategy. And to be honest, I don't think he'll do it. I cannot imagine they will actually put that into practice, whereby the business of the Parliament is going on. They have one debate, guess the next debate, how independence will benefit the Scottish energy industry or something. But all the Conservatives get up and walk out. I can't imagine it's going to happen. But maybe it will. And if it does happen, I can't imagine it's going to work. But let's see. Right, who would envy Russell Findlay's job? I mean, I think it's an impossible job. What you do as leader of the Conservatives in Scotland, their strategy for years, decades even, has been to put themselves ever so slightly to the right of the Lib Dems and Labour and the SNP are all bunched together. Just be ever so slightly to the right, and then you'll sweep up the whole rest of the political spectrum, unionists. That was their plan. But that's not going to work anymore because reform are breathing down their neck. But if they go and try and cover off reform, if they try and win back reform voters, well, how do they do that? Are they going to out-reform them? Are they going to be more extreme on reform's policies? That's pretty hard to do because some of reform's policies are populist in the sense that they're not really realistic. They couldn't actually be put into practice. But they sound good. It's what people want to hear. So if they did try to compete with reform, what's going to happen to the middle ground voters they need to win off Labour, off the SNP? I mean, I just say it's an impossible job he's got. Anyway, we will see how it goes with that, with Russell Findlay. Right, don't forget the conference. I'll just paste our tickets link back in there. Right, this was interesting. I don't know if you had this leaflet through your door. I got it a week or two ago from was it from Scottish Power or some associated electricity distribution business. Anyway, it says about emergency power cuts due to electricity demand shortages. Right, I don't know how that makes sense, actually. You don't have power cuts because there's a shortage of demand, do you? You have power cuts because there's a shortage of supply. So I don't know what's going on there. So I think I should say emergency power cuts due to electricity supply shortages. In other words, they're envisaging a time when the electricity generation capacity in Scotland or wherever else we get it from, England as well, wherever else we get it from, is not going to be adequate. Therefore, electricity will not be supplied to your home. So there will be a power cut. And it goes into a bit more detail. Emergency power cuts across the UK are unlikely. Well, they must think they're likely enough to bother producing a leaflet and putting it through millions of doors to warn people about it. They said they're unlikely. They would only happen if there was an extreme shortage of gas or electricity to meet demand. Yeah, shortage of supply to meet demand. So they're saying, yeah, they're opening up this possibility, which people have talked about a lot. I mean, for years, people have been saying UK and Scottish government, they're quite obsessed with their green targets and they're pursuing them at the expense of security of supply. And we're heading to the stage, which we haven't been at in previous decades, we're heading to the stage where there's a risk that we won't be able to generate enough electricity for our day-to-day needs. And so there'll be power cuts. So it says, if there is an emergency power cut, you may lose power for around 3 hours at a time. It's possible you could lose power more than once. So if an emergency power cut is needed, a rota system will be activated across the country. That way, not everyone loses power all at once. Now, I've heard from people who live in African countries, for example, who talk about this, that the power supply is intermittent. You have a phase, part of the day when it cuts out. or there's a rota or something like that. Well, they're raising the prospect that this is coming to Scotland. And I think when it does, I think people's commitment to the green cause for almost everyone will go out of the window instantly the moment their house is in darkness and their TV is not working and the cooker's not working and the heating's not working or whatever else, can't charge the car up. Then I think there will be a massive, massive backlash. People will have no tolerance at all. Generally in politics, if things are in the abstract, you might get some activists fired up about them, but it's quite hard work to do that. Once there's something that's impinging on someone's daily life and they're frustrated and annoyed by it, then that's a whole different kettle of fish. So then the government is really playing with fire. Governments, UK and Scottish, they're absolutely playing with fire. If it does happen, I say the backlash will be very, very severe. And people will be inclined to vote for whoever's going to make sure this doesn't happen again. And people saying about, there's a carbon footprint or whatever, there's not going to be much concern about that when people's houses have lost their electricity supply. Now, in pursuit of carbon emission reductions, okay, fair enough, but it's got to be done in a sensible and secure way. And I think a lot of experts are saying this is not what's happened. Politicians have been more concerned about making promises at COP, whatever we're up to, and having their photograph taken and being patted on the back by Greta Thunberg than actually ensuring the energy supply in their nation. We shall see. This will increase the insistence of electric vehicles. Yeah, I mean, the electricity capacity required to charge vehicles is pretty enormous. I mean, the hope, obviously, the basic plan, I guess, is that people charge them overnight when there's surplus electricity supply. With the electricity at the moment, it's quite hard to store. There are ways of storing it, but they're not that brilliant. So something that uses electricity at night sort of makes sense. But then if you have power cuts, the more things are electrified, the more things don't work when the power goes off. But another thing that doesn't work when the power goes off is the payment system. So your local shop isn't selling anything anymore, unless you're going to go back to cash, but there's not enough of it. So very serious problems afoot, it seems. Right, what else has been happening? Right, Humza Yousaf. What is he like? He's obsessed with the Middle East situation. Obsessed. Let's just look at this post on X. Why is there so much moral cowardice from political leaders regarding the outrageous attacks in Lebanon? Indiscriminate attacks that have killed children and many innocent people who have nothing to do with Hezbollah. Rouse the outrage and condemnation, David Lammy. So he's challenging David Lammy, who is a really extreme left, to be honest, incompetent politician, but he is extreme left. He's pretty anti-Israel, but not enough for Humza Yousaf. Not enough for Humza Yousaf. Now, Humza Yousaf, occasionally, he'll just drop something in, so you can't say he's got nothing to say about like the Hamas terrorist attacks or Hezbollah firing rockets into Israel. He'll just occasionally say something where it says that's not right and what Israel's doing isn't right. But the general point he's making repeatedly again and again and again and again is sort of anti-Israel. And I think what drives it, I got a little video to play, so I've forgotten to put it in. But what drives it is I think he sees himself as a Muslim, as being in solidarity with Muslims in the region. It's as simple as that. So it's not a matter of weighing up the issue. Who's right in this particular case? What are the arguments here? What's the logic? How does this stack up? For Humza Yousaf, it's not about that. It's I'm a Muslim, and because I'm a Muslim, I'm on the side of the Muslims, and I'm going to be outraged at the harms done to Muslims, and that's his take. He's also recently, he was saying it's all about racism as well. He's saying that the reason, attacks on Lebanon, etc. So it's not to do with Hezbollah firing rockets into Israel. The heart of it is racism. I think I'm just so glad this man is not First Minister anymore. I am so glad that he has gone, because his judgment is so skewed on these matters. It is frightening. There's not the faintest hint there's approaching things from a genuine, balanced point of view or balance point of view, or even from from the UK's interests, so even that point of view as well. Nothing like that at all. Right, just got 10 minutes left. A few more quick things to go through. Equal pay claims. So next, these stories are coming out quite regularly now. So next, the clothing store is saying that it could lead to store closures. So whole stores could have to close. That would mean you'd assume dozens of people losing their jobs. A real hit for the business. And the reason this is happening, as I've explained many times before, is these ridiculous equal pay claims where women claim to have been discriminated against because people who did a different job got paid more than they did. So with next, for example, it would be you could work in the dirty warehouse, lugging big cardboard boxes around, or you could work in the nice warm shop, speaking to customers. Okay, and market forces demand that more people would like to work in the shop. So the pay for workers in the shop might be a little bit lower than the pay for people in the warehouse. But anyone, male or female, could choose either job. It's absolutely up to them. Over history, women chose to work in the shop, earn a bit less, but it was maybe the sort of work they preferred. Men in general maybe tend to say, okay, I'll go and work in the dirty warehouse, and maybe a bit dangerous as well, noisy, whatever. I'll go and work in there. And then the women take next to court because they didn't get paid as much as the people who did the job that they chose not to do. I mean, totally mad, totally mad. I mean, who's standing up against this? I mean, is the Reform Party even standing up against this? I haven't heard them, haven't heard anything about it. So this is resulting in shops closing. It's resulting in lots of teachers being made redundant in Glasgow. It's resulting in Glasgow having to sell lots of museum buildings, etc., etc., etc. So, yeah, I mean, the madness continues, and it's just got to be challenged. But at the moment, there's no challenge to it whatsoever. I mean, ultimately, if the law is letting them get away with this, the law needs to change. Legislation needs to be passed to just put an end to this once and for all. This was an interesting little snippet as well. I mean, the fertility rate in South Korea is catastrophic. I think it might be even under 1. Or like 2.1 roughly is replacement fertility. I think in South Korea is under 1. That means your population is just going to absolutely fall off a cliff. I mean, that very quickly. We're not talking about in hundreds of years. We're talking about in decades. So you'd have whole towns and cities uninhabited. Businesses, the tax revenue of the country would absolutely collapse, while you've still got quite an aged population as well to support. I mean, absolute catastrophe facing South Korea. So they're described as a national emergency, quite right. And they're now thinking about a policy, debating a policy of basically paying wouldn't be the right word, but basically giving about $78,000. That would be about what, 60 or 70,000 pounds to every newborn. I don't know if that means to the families or to the actual child. I would assume it means to the families. That's pretty extreme, isn't it? But the general picture around the world is that when fertility rates go down, they get suppressed by various factors. Most of them, I would say, cultural. Yeah, I mean, basically feminism tends to be feminist thinking, tends to push down fertility rates, loss of a culture of marriage. It's all related. Just that whole progressive ideology tends to result in reducing fertility rates. But paying £60,000, would that work in Scotland, do you think? If we said every child you have, we pay you £60,000. Well, to be honest, I think for a lot of people, that would be far and away their most lucrative business opportunity. So I think it would make a huge difference. I mean, if you made it, say, £10,000, what would that do? I mean, all sorts. Another possibility I heard recently was the idea that when a child's born, the state gives you a loan. Let's say gives the couple, that needs to be a married couple, let's say, gives the married couple a loan of, say, £20,000. And in 5 years' time, if you've had a kid, then £5,000 of your loan is just written off. If maybe not, I don't know. You could change the numbers anyway. This is roughly speaking. So after a period of time, if you had one child, £5,000 gets written off. If you have 2 children, then that's £10,000 written off. So if you have 4 children, the whole loan is written off. Now, if it turns out that the couple don't have any children for whatever reason, for choice or whatever other reason, there might be, then they're still being given an interest-free loan that at some point in the future they've got to pay back. So they haven't lost anything. They've been given a benefit regardless, but that would serve as an incentive, again, for people to have as many children as they would like to. Think of the fertility policy. You don't want people to have more children than they want. And I think the evidence is it's very difficult to persuade people to do that. But we do want people to have as many children as they would like to, because research tends to indicate, if we say to couples in their 40s, whatever, how many children have you had? 2. How many would you have liked? 3, 4. And I think, therefore, the intelligent thing to do is to then look at what were the barriers, what were the reasons why you didn't have as many children as you would have liked. Sometimes it's cost of housing, sometimes just the quality of education, all sorts of things, and it's worth looking at them. But it's interesting, South Korea, at least, it's just showing how critical this issue is. It should be higher up the agenda. In Scotland, I said South Korea's fertility rates may be hovering around 1, which is catastrophic. But in Scotland, were we 1.28 or something? So that's pretty catastrophic as well, pretty dramatic. So steps need to be taken. I think I'll make a video about this next week. 14,000 violent crimes committed by children in the last year. And there's also another story I might talk about in the video about crime in shops. Again, a lot of it being committed by young people. Some of it theft, some of it vandalism, some of them just reckless, disruptive behavior. I remember being in Dobies once, the big garden centre, and a few, I don't know, maybe 3 young teenagers came in on bikes and just started charging around the shop on bikes. And I really had to go at one of them. But then, the shop assistants came out, and it seemed like it was a regular thing. And so one of the shop assistants went and challenged one of the boys on the bike, and the boy put his hand up to do a high five. I was watching this, and I was watching this woman, and I was thinking, please do not give him a high five, for goodness sake. But she did. Trying to be pally and chummy, and if you wouldn't mind, would you please take your bike out? Whereas it would be more appropriate if someone got the bikes off them, and so something that would really teach them a lesson would have been appropriate. So this is a growing problem. And what would I link it to? I'd link it to lots of things: family breakdown, basically decline in respect for authority, respect for adult authority, which is taught in schools. Children are taught to defy adult authority. They're taught that adults haven't got the right to tell them what to do. It's called children's rights, but that's one of the messages that comes through in it. And the other thing I think we just got to bear in mind through this process, well, maybe slightly premature, but maybe not. Think about the smacking ban as well. Now, the smacking ban was on the cards for a long time, and there's been a push for many, many years in Scotland to demonize parents smacking their kids. I mean, it used to be quite routine. Naughty kid, you give them a smack, and that was part of the process, how you taught them how to behave, taught them a lesson, short, sharp shock, and you kept them on track, and they became fine, upstanding citizens in many cases. But the push against that's been going on for many, many years, and then smacking was indeed banned. Now, when something like a smacking ban is introduced, the temptation is, well, the people who supported it, what they'll tend to say is, oh, look, we've introduced the smacking ban. It's lunchtime the next day, and look, nothing's happened. The streets are not full of marauding kids. So it just shows it was, we don't need to smack kids. It was completely unnecessary. The law was right. But then 10 years' time, when these kids are growing up, 20 years' time, how does it play out? But by the time you're at 10 years' time, maybe this has had a really significant effect on increasing indiscipline among children. But there's no way of coming to that conclusion. There's no experiment you can do. There's so many other things that have changed. There's so many other variables you can't pin down. It's very difficult to pin down that it was actually the smacking ban that did it, because it would be part of a gradual process. But I believe we are in that gradual process of basically undermining what traditionally would have been the processes to keep kids in line, to discipline, to train them, to teach them good behavior, to teach them right from wrong. We're systematically taking those things away, and we're paying the price for it. And I think, again, that's the sort of argument that needs to be made in the Scottish Parliament, and it's not. It's simply not, including by the Conservatives. The Conservatives will do the, keep people locked up for longer. They'll do that line, but the rest of it, that's a bit too hot for them, I think, a bit too controversial. They're probably not unrelated as well. I was quite shocked through this. Scotland is worst in the world for boys smoking cannabis. The highest rate of cannabis use among 15-year-olds, boys, in the world. Now, does that lead to anything positive in terms of mental health problems or behavior or academic achievement? It doesn't lead to anything positive at all. It will lead to a lot of dysfunction in society and messed up lives, unproductive lives as well. But Scotland is a world leader. The SNP's response to it, well, obviously we need to look at legalising cannabis. That's what the Greens and the Lib Dems want. The SNP are toying with the idea. Labour are probably quite sort of head in that direction as well. That's just their philosophy. Because the problem with drugs, as far as the SNP is concerned, is the stigma. It's not what the drugs do to people, not what the people on drugs do. It's not the harm it does to their bodies. The real issue they've got to tackle is the stigma. So we've got safe consumption rooms. Is there already one in Glasgow? I think it might already be in action. But certainly, yeah, I'm pretty sure they're already in action. And what they do, I think, is they produce a moral hazard. I've been trying to get my head around the concept of moral hazard because the meaning of it isn't apparent from the words. But a moral hazard is where the negative consequences of a risky behavior are taken away from a person. So the person who makes the dangerous choice is insulated from the consequences of that dangerous choice. So currently, if someone thinks, I'm going to take illegal drugs, then there's some dangers to themselves. They might have a dirty needle. The drug might not be pure. And there's all sorts of potential dangers with that. Maybe they can have a bad reaction and there'll be no one on hand to help them. So it's a pretty risky thing to do. And then there's also risks on other people. You might get in your car and drive and kill someone. You might accidentally set your flat on fire and end up, burning out the whole block. You might behave erratically and frighten someone or attack them in some way. So really serious risks to other people and some risks to yourself, significant risks to yourself as well. But what the Scottish government's trying to do is take away the risks to the drug user, but you can't take away the risks to the rest of society. So that creates a moral hazard. So that creates a situation where the person choosing to take the risk is more insulated from the negative consequences. So a problem. Isn't cannabis linked to long-term psychological problems? Yes. I mean, occasionally, the BBC will come up with an article. Professor so-and-so says, cannabis isn't that bad after all for mental health. And I'm sure there's a bit of ideological skew going on here. There's very substantial evidence showing mental health problems correlating with cannabis use. I mean, I knew someone a while ago whose story was that as a young man, maybe as a university student, he took cannabis once, and that instantly created a psychological problem for him that he never really got over. It was a sort of depression, anxiety type thing. It was instant with the first time he used cannabis. I mean, that's pretty frightening, isn't it? But as far as the Lib Dems are concerned, or the Greens, they say, oh, it's fine. We need to spend more on youth mental health services. That's the way to deal with this situation. But not good. Yeah, I mean, a disgraceful situation. Sad, tragic, and disgraceful as well. Right, that's the end of my things today. Thank you very much for your comments. It's good to spend this hour with you. As a last reminder, get your conference tickets, of course, for the 9th of November. We're looking forward to that. It'd be great to see you there. Bring a friend or two, of course. And I hope to see you next week. Good night.